So what's your name?
John Mertens.
What are your credentials? What is your job?
I teach political science here at King State College.
And have you ever had anything published?
I have had a couple.
What have you had published?
I've had two, scholarly essays published in professional journals, and I've had two op-ed essays published in newspapers.
Oh, how would you define the term social class?
Social class, the way it was taught to me, and the way I think it's easiest to think about it, is a category in society within which movement is easy and typical. And therefore, outside of that category, movement isn't easy and isn't typical. And just so if you wanted to do a two-class society, rich and poor, if you're poor, then moving sort of within the poor group is easy and typical, but moving outside of the poor group into the rich group isn't easy and typical.
So how does one become a part of one of those social groups?
Well, the biggest determinant of that is what you're born into. But then
so
think about
education's one factor, but what are the things that you can point to and say this is a dividing thing? Race,
race
finances.
gets confused with class a lot, and
So
it's
race
sort of a
has
separate.
no part of social class.
Well, they correlate to each other,
Okay.
but they're different.
They're different, but would you say that race is a part of social classes?
There's an overlap there. You know,
Okay.
white and Asian people tend statistically to be upper middle,
Okay.
and they tend to be overrepresented in upper middle and higher classes, wealthy class, and
So would you define social classes as more of a statistical rather than a philosophical thing?
I think it has to be both. I mean, I think you have to have sort of a philosophical understanding of the concept at the foundation, and then you've got to try to figure out how you want to measure that in
Okay.
the real world. And income is what people normally look at, but that only tells part of the story. Like I was talking about with this hypothetical blue-collar family, you know, there are people with those kind of jobs that make a lot of money.
Yes.
You know, so it isn't just about money. It's almost more about mindset and life chances, if you want to think, and the opportunities that are going to be available to you, the path that you're going to be led down.
So divisions of social classes. How does a group of people just have one mindset if it is a mindset thing like you said? How do we then classify people? How does everyone just think the same way?
Well, one of the things that, you know, the sort of body of work that I used when I was doing my dissertation in grad school, a lot of the way they do it is by occupational groupings, which is why I guess I sort of started talking about blue collar and things like that. You know, there are certain kind of categories of jobs that we can look at that people have that is related to how much they make, but it isn't everything in terms of how they make and how they view themselves in social class. And I could probably use myself as an example too. I mean, I teach, and I don't make tons of money, but you know, my parents did pretty well, and I'm pretty cognizant of sort of where I fit in society and that kind of thing.
Where do you see yourself fitting in society?
Well, it'd be hard for me to make an argument that I'm really anything other than, say, upper middle class and kind of the lifestyle that I'm used to and the opportunities that are available to me and those kind of things. Certainly not the super wealthy, but you know, my parents had decent jobs, made decent money, and my parents are kind of an interesting story because when I was born, they didn't have a lot of money. My dad was in the Army, and you probably, if you wanted to classify them in class terms, and this also would fit with how both of them were raised, you'd probably say lower middle class. And my dad was able to use his Army career to kind of advance himself, and then by the time he retired, I think and my mom ended up being a principal of an elementary school. I think you'd put him pretty solidly in the upper middle class. So that's what I'm used to, and you know, I went to school with people that are like that, and you just get used to seeing the world through a certain lens, based on, you know, there's all the kind of cultural references that come with that. And education is one of the big things, and maybe I can put it to you this way: depending on what kind of class you're born into, your expectations are going to be different. The high school that I went to is actually measured recently as the 8th best public high school in the country. So I come from one of those, like, you know, pretty well off suburban school districts, public school, but that has all the resources, good tax base, everything, and it's not are you going to college, it's where are you going to college. Do you know what I mean? It's just expectation. Everybody's going to college, their parents went to college, their friends are going to college, their brothers and sisters went to college, and you contrast that with the kids of some of the people that I play softball with in Keene, where their parents didn't go to college, and maybe some of their friends are going to go to college and some of their friends aren't. There's a different expectation level. Do you know what I mean? So everything that they're doing between the time that they're born and the time that they're 18, based on this sort of class environment that they're born into, is going to shape how they look at the world, what they think of themselves, what they expect of themselves, what people expect of them, and then because of that, in some ways, what doors are open to them.
But you said someone who you play softball with, who you consider blue collar, is actually a small business owner, while you yourself are a teacher for the government. Small business owners, or business owners in general, usually in a horizontal class view of lower, middle, upper, are usually considered upper, and teachers are usually considered lower. But you consider him blue collar, which I guess to generalize would be considered lower. Would it be fair to say that it's not entirely fair, our view of the world, as a vertical class system, but more of a horizontal class system of cultural differences rather than economic?
That, in an ideal sense, that might be, I would be for that. I don't like all the kind of stigma that comes with class.
What are the horizontal, what is our classical view and how do we define them?
I think it's more interesting, like I said, to use kind of income classifications, and I'm probably going to not remember them all right now off the top of my head, but I remember when I was doing my dissertation research, there were 7 that were commonly used, and it was like, agricultural labor, and then there were like farmers, which is sort of the distinction between people who just work there and people who actually own the farms. But then there were also business owners and things like that. But beyond that, there were kind of highly skilled people, but people that still worked for somebody else. Do you know what I mean? People with a lot of education, and in some cases a lot of money, but people that ultimately worked for somebody else. And that's probably what I would fall into, even though I don't make a lot of money. Then there were kind of clerical and sales people, and there were a couple classifications for blue-collar labor, depending on whether you were just a worker or whether you had some management. And I would put my friend, even though he's a business owner, probably in that higher blue-collar category, because he's still fundamentally a blue-collar guy. He goes out and puts, stuff on the side of houses. That's what he grew up doing, and people he knows. But so even though he's sort of in management, you could say, because he owns his own business, I don't think that makes him the same as, some kind of venture capitalist person. He's just not going to look at the world the same way.
Yes. Is the concept of social class a negative thing?
I would like to say that it's not, but that's what I was saying. I started to get into a minute ago about the ideal world versus the real world. But it is, and some people will argue that class is still sort of the last acceptable form of discrimination. We do look at people, and I would even say look down on people, and I think that's unfortunate, and it really says something. I think it says something negative about our society that we judge people based on those kind of criteria. To some extent, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say it's uniquely American, but we certainly take it to a different level. Quick example: I heard this story about a high school kid that went to Sweden as an exchange student, like I said, in high school. And one of the things they were struck by is at lunchtime, the whole school would meet in the cafeteria. All the students, the principals, the teachers, the janitors, everybody, and they would all just sit and have lunch and talk about what their family was like and what they did for the weekend. And if you think about that in the U.S., you never do that. The president of this college is never going to have lunch with the people who clean the college and cut the grass and stuff like that. We just don't do that in this society. It's stratified. So we certainly have those divisions. Whether we look down upon it or not, a lot of people do. It's unfortunate, but that's the fact of the matter. We do, and it probably ties into this whole American dream thing. We're all aspiring to be better, whatever that. Amen.